One of the biggest challenges on the SAT reading section for students is understanding what is making answer choices right versus wrong. So many students get stuck between multiple answer choices and feel like they just have to guess or pick an answer choice that they really thought was correct, but the SAT actually says is wrong. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how you can tell why 3 answer choices are incorrect and 1 answer choice is correct for every single question across the reading section. Now, how we're going to do this is we're going to work through a reading passage, and you're going to watch me break down exactly how I'm attacking the questions and the answer choices to find the correct answer and identify the 3 incorrect ones. Now, the way you're going to get the most out of this video is go ahead and pull up practice test number 8. I've put the link in the description below. Work through the 5th passage, and then watch through the entire video, not just for questions that you miss, but also for questions that you got correct, and look at what I am doing different from you, how I am identifying right versus wrong answer choices, and I can promise you by the end of the video, you're going to feel way more confident with how to identify right versus wrong across the SAT reading section. All right, let's jump straight into the passage here. Now, I already spent about 90 seconds reading this before I started the video, so we're going to jump right to our first question. Now, I always save this type of question for last, so we get to start with one of these paired evidence ones here. And these lines are all in a pretty tight area, so I typically recommend for students to read individual lines and go back line by line, but this is in a small area. I've got a pretty good short-term memory, and I remember this part well, so I'm just going to go back and reskim that, and then I should be able to answer both of these questions. So we're talking about how closing the trap requires a lot of energy, reopening it can take a lot of time, so it only wants to close if it knows that the insect on it is basically big enough it's worth its time. We're talking about how the hairs can feel the prey, and if it touches one hair, it won't spring shut, but a big enough bug is going to touch multiple hairs. So let's take a look at kind of this evidence here. Now, a lot of these lines could be talking about advantages. We could be talking about advantage of identifying something's large enough, saving energy. So we're really going to have to kind of attack 43 first. Now, enables the plant to identify these species that is far too specific. I cannot defend that based off the passage. Conserve the plant's calcium reserves. We did not discuss that anywhere in any of those lines. Safeguard the plant's energy supply. This looks to be correct. Prevent the plant from closing before capturing its prey. Well, this doesn't make any sense because to capture the prey, we have to close. So it's going to have to be C here. And then as we go back up here, I'm pretty sure it's 3 to 7. Yep. Closing requires a huge expense of energy. So that's going to be the advantage to requiring multiple triggers is we are going to be saving ourselves a lot of energy. So that's going to be A and C down here. Now, 45, the use of the phrases dawdling insect, happily meanders, and unassuming bugs encounter in the first 2 paragraphs establish a tone. Well, these are definitely not academic terms. This is a scientific article. These are pretty casual ways of talking about it. Melodramatic is kind of like being extra, very over the top. We're not doing anything negative. It's not mocking. It's just going to be informal here. Now we'll take a look at 46. In the second paragraph, the discussion of short-term memory primarily functions to blank. So let's read back through and let's look out for short-term memory. So we can look at this system. We were talking about the system of requiring multiple touches to close is analogous to short-term memory. First, the fly trap encodes this information, forms the memory that something it doesn't know has touched one of its hairs, and it stores the info for a number of seconds, retains it, and finally retrieves the memory, recalls the memory once a second hair is touched. And now we're just giving an example about this, about how it has to be big enough. I believe we're talking about the ant. So we'll come back down here. Nothing controversial. So that's why I can immediately kind of knock off B. Clarify an explanation of what prompts the Venus flytrap to close. This seems to be correct. Stress the distinction between the strategies of the Venus flytrap and the strategies of no reference of humans at all. Emphasize the Venus flytrap's capacity for retaining detailed information about its prey. I believe this is opposite of the passage. This is one of the 5 types of wrong answer choices we see on the SAT. If we went back up here, I believe it says that something it doesn't know what, so there's no way that we can basically have detailed information because it's not, that's opposite of the passage, so A is going to have to be our correct answer there. What you can start to see is I'm attacking all these teeny tiny details in the answer choices as I work through. It's all about finding what's wrong on top about finding what's right. According to the passage, which statement best explains why the Venus flytrap requires a second trigger hair to be touched within a short amount of time for its trap to close? Well, I remember this whole part of the passage was talking about the triggers and Hodig and Siever's experiment, where they talked about, I think down here, we're talking about the first part of the calcium channels opening up. So I'm going to really be skimming for the keyword second here. So I see second. Now I'm going to read back in this area. They propose that the trap requires a relatively high concentration of calcium in order to close, that a single action potential from just one trigger hair being touched does not reach this level. Therefore, a second hair needs to be stimulated to push the calcium concentration over this threshold and spring the trap. So as we look back at this, produces an electrical charge. That was the later experiment. I can't remember the name of the person who did the experiment off the top of my head. The second trigger stabilizes the surge. We're not stabilizing, we're pushing it over. Prompts the calcium channels to open. Well, that would be the first trigger prompted them to open. The second trigger provides a necessary supplement. That's what we're talking about. We're pushing it over, we're supplementing it. 48. Which choice describes a scenario in which Hodak and Siever's model predicts that a Venus flytrap will not close around the insect? This means I'm going to be looking for something most likely opposite of the passage, and I know what I just read through was talking about what's making it close. So I'm going to finish up reskimming through that paragraph here. So the encoding of info requires maintaining a high enough level of calcium so that it pushes it over the threshold. The calcium dissipates over time. If the second one doesn't happen quickly, the final concentration won't be high enough and the memory is lost. So we're basically saying, and what I kind of remembered from my first read of this is, we need these multiple pushes for it to actually go through. So we'll start with A. A large insect's second contact with the plant's trigger hairs results in a calcium ion concentration above the trap's threshold. Well, that would close it, so that's why A is wrong. B, a large insect makes contact with the second trigger hair after a period of inactivity during which the ion concentrations have diminished appreciably. This looks like it should be our right answer, but I always like to check all of them, unless it's super, super obvious. A large insect's contact with the plant's trigger hair causes calcium channels to open in the trap. Well, this would be the first step in the process, so this doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an instance where it's not going to close compared to what we just read in B, so we'll get rid of that. A large insect's contact with a second trigger hair occurs within 10 seconds of its contact with the first trigger hair. Well, that would seem to be a very short period of time, which is what they were talking about. So B is definitely going to be our correct answer there. There's instances where there's sometimes not a perfect answer, and you could have multiple answers that maybe could work, but this one is far, far better than all of the others. And I kind of talked through the reasons why the others don't really work as well there. 67, just a used in line, basically it's a word in context question. So I always like to go back and read prior sentence through the end of that sentence if bare minimum. Plug in my own word if I feel comfortable, or I can plug in the answer choices. Subsequent research supports this model. Volkov and his colleagues at Oakwood University in Alabama first demonstrated that it is indeed electricity that causes the Venus flytrap to close. Well, we're saying like they first proved this is the word that I would naturally basically want to pick there. This is opposite, and we're not arguing it. We're saying this is something that they basically proved. The only word that would make sense in that context is established. 50 and 51, so we get another paired evidence question here. So based on the passage, what criticism might be made of Volkov's testing? So that's going to be our last paragraph of Hodak and Siever's model. Well, once again, all of our lines are pretty tight. Some SAT passages, these are way more spread out, but this is going to be an easy one for me to just reskim those lines. And what I remember is Volkov was basically just doing a bunch of electricity stuff here. And that's what we just kind of read in the last sentence. So to test this model, they rigged up very fine electrodes and applied an electrical current to the open loads of the trap. This made the trap close without any direct touch to its trigger hairs. This seems to be a big issue because everything we just read in the first experiment was about basically having the trigger hairs be hit twice and be enough of a hit in a recent period of time to push the calcium levels over the thresholds. When they modified this experiment by altering the amount of electrical current, Volkov could determine the exact charge needed. And then we're talking about how much was needed to do it. This seems to be our big issue. So we'll go back and we'll make sure that's one of our lines there. Yep, that's going to be 71 to 74. Now let's kind of come back up here. Volkov's understanding of Hodak and Siever's model was incorrect. We don't say anywhere that he had a lack of understanding. We're just showing that he's doing something different. So that lets me get rid of that. Volkov's measurement did not corroborate a central element. This seems to be correct because it was that requirement of a touch, requirement of the calcium thresholds. Volkov's direct application of electrical current would have been objectionable. This is a classic other type of wrong answer, which is not in the passage. Maybe this would be true, but everything on the SAT you have to be able to prove given what you see on the page. We cannot prove that. Volkov's technology, same exact issue here. Maybe that's true, but we cannot prove that. Then 52. Based on the passage in studying the Venus flytrap, Volkov and his colleagues, I'm getting tongue-tied, made the most extensive use of which type of evidence? Well, nowhere did I see mathematical models. Analysis of data collected from previous researchers' work involving the Venus flytrap's response to "here is our wrong word." We showed that they were the first ones who were doing electricity as far as we know, so we cannot pick that. Information obtained from monitoring the Venus flytrap's response to varying amounts of electrical current, that's exactly what they were doing. We don't see earlier models of the Venus flytrap. So now we just have to go back to that very first question. All right, purpose of the passage, discuss findings that offer a scientific explanation. This seems to be correct. Present the research that suggests that Venus flytrap's predatory behavior is both complex and, there's our wrong word, unique is not true. Identify the process by which the Venus flytrap's action has, there's our word, nothing about evolution. Provide a brief overview of the Venus flytrap and its predatory behavior. Well, we do get a little bit of this stuff at the front. We talked about the Venus flytrap, we talked about a little bit of its anatomy, but the whole rest of it is discussing findings from these experiments. So what you hopefully saw as I'm working through is I'm really always looking for the teeny tiny elements which are making stuff right versus wrong. So one word is enough to make an entire answer choice wrong. So as you start working through the SAT, it's all about being able to put your finger on the evidence and to basically defend an entire answer choice. As soon as you see one part of an SAT passage which makes it wrong, that is enough of an answer choice, that is enough to knock off the entire answer choice. Now, the other thing that you may have noticed that I am doing that a lot of people don't do is I am crossing off specific details in answer choices rather than entire answer choices. By doing this, and this helps so many of my students, if you cross off answer choices, sometimes you have the tendency to go back and reread them. But if you cross off a specific detail, it serves as a helpful reminder that that is the part that I knew was wrong and helps you more confidently work through and avoid the struggle that many students have, which is rereading over and over and over again on the reading test. Now, this hopefully will give you a really good foundation. Other things I would recommend, working through individual passages 13 minutes and starting to apply some of this strategy and looking for the small details of what's making stuff right versus wrong. If you guys have any other questions around the reading section at all, pop them in the comments. If you have any other videos you'd like to see, same thing, pop them in the comments. If this has helped you out, please like and subscribe and share this with your friends. It helps the algorithm push this video out more.